Am I live? I think I am. Good day, guys. From a very cold South Africa, it's 2:30 in the morning. Um, Hi Stephanie, hi Amy. I see a couple of you have voted in the poll. Let's have a look. Um, Pretty even Stevens. A couple of you say Vincent was struggling in The Hague. That's why he felt sorrow. Their father died in April 1882. A couple of you saying that as well. That's not the case. It had to do with Sien. 25% of you saying that. And then 50% saying all of the above. Often in multiple choice, it is all of the above. So, but not in this case. Okay, so I see a couple of you, your knowledge of the Van Gogh thing maybe needs a little bit of fine tuning. So, welcome to episode 20. Can you believe we at episode 20 already? We are in April, early April, 1882. While I was doing research for this episode, I kind of inadvertently went to early 1883. And to be honest, it felt a lot like early 1882. It felt like not a lot had really changed. So I am considering once we get to about June, after he's in hospital, jumping 6 months. So literally skipping 6 months of letters and going to basically early 1883. And I'm going to share with you why I want to do that. I mean, we can always come back to it at the end and do a sort of postscript to the Van Gogh letters. Now, what I want to show you is this is where we are right now, right? So if you have a look at that section there, that's where we are in terms of the Van Gogh letters, and we've got all of these letters still to go through. And these are going to take a really long time to get through. And we are going to go through these, but then we still got all of that to get through. And we're still going to be in 1882. So we're going to be in 1882 for a really long time. And we want to kind of get to 1883. And then this is when things really start happening 1885, 6, 7, and 8, right? And 9. We want to kind of get to from 1885, this sort of period. So we don't want to spend too much time in 1882. And as I say, we can come back to it. We can come back to it a little bit later. And what I'm thinking of doing is some of you can do it kind of as homework. Paddy, good to see you here. Yvonne Phillips as well. Some of you, if you want to, you can do it as homework, and then you can report back to me which letters you think I should highlight that really stood out to you, where there's some kind of milestone. So that is the sort of infographic of the letters. If you have a look at letters by period, if we go to this site, this is dealing with the Hague period. So 1882 starts there, right? And we've gotten to there. And this is how many letters continue from there, just to give you an idea. All of this is 1882, 1882, 1882, 1882, still 1882, and then finally that's 1883. So as I say, I was doing research and I sort of inadvertently went to 1883 instead of 1882, and I was like, but this feels no different to what he was saying in 1882. So as I say, I want to get to June and then jump ahead 6 months. Are you guys okay with that? Yvonne says that's fine. You guys are welcome sort of between Wednesday and Sunday to read a couple of letters. You've got the links. And if something stands out to you, you can highlight that and we can kind of come back to it. As I say, we can do this sort of 6-month period as a postscript to this whole series, maybe a little bit later. Stephanie says maybe we can come up with a short 3-sentence or so summary of the letters and then can share with you. Yeah, you're welcome to do that. So I think you can see that this Hague period really goes on for a really, really long time. And it is important because it's his sort of formative period. It's where he becomes who he is. Bear in mind, he's left home and he's arguing to some extent with his parents. He's trying to find love, and he's also trying to find himself in terms of his art. And what's quite interesting, so this is the letter we're going to be dealing with today. It's this one. Sunday, 2nd of April, 1882. This is the actual letter. You can see for Vincent, this is quite an unusual letter. It is quite untidy. Look at is written around the side there as well on the border. Can you guys see that? On the border of this letter is written as well, and then there's a fair amount of scratching and scribbling in between as well. And I mean, that adds a whole different dimension to his handwriting, which is, if you're going to do the same thing we did with Brian Laundrie, you look at his state of mind through the actual letters, right? I wonder if I can bring this up a bit bigger. But normally his handwriting is quite neat, quite legible. And here it certainly is a bit more scratchy. There's some more writing in the margin, scratching out. You can see the size is varying. And so you do kind of have a little bit of a sense of the artist is trying to find himself. And by saying that, is sort of also his handwriting is fluctuating. His handwriting is it's incredible, actually. If you look at some letters, how big they are. Look how big that particular, I don't know if that's a Y, but it's a really big letter. And then look how tiny some of these others are. And so you get a sense that he feels both big and small in different ways. This is the last page. There you can see still more writing in the margins, right? Look how tiny the writing is here as well. And a lot of big and small writing has got to do with emphasis. So we're going to come back to this letter. But before we do, I want to refer to this book again. Let me bring myself back into the picture a little bit. So I want to refer to this book while it's playing with the... Okay, so Van Gogh. It's actually my brother's book. I actually saw my brother a little bit earlier, and we just he's reading the other Van Gogh, my book on Van Gogh's brother, and I just mentioned to him, it's quite unbelievable that the 3 Van Gogh brothers all died very close to 30 years old, and their father lived about twice as long. So quite interesting. How is my brother? He is very fit and slim and trim, and I'm trying to catch up a little bit to him. So yeah, I did quite a bit of training today myself. Okay, so this is from page 26 of the Making of an Artist section, and it deals with Sien. So, and it deals obviously with the Hague period. When Key rejected him, he turned to any other woman who would have him and found one. I really like the way the author writes that, because I think it's so true. When Key rejected Van Gogh, he was so desperate, he was so forlorn, but he didn't want to be overcome by that. and you can imagine that he could have been overcome by that. Um, he, um, he he literally did turn to any other woman who would have him, and then he found one, and it was a prostitute, and her name was Klasina Maria Hurnik, known as Sien, and she was older than Vincent, like he. She had a daughter and was expecting a second child. And then they referred to a previous letter he'd written, which I have referred to a couple of times now, where he writes, "It is not the first time that I've been unable to resist the feeling of attraction and love towards those women in particular whom the pastors damn so vehemently, condemning and despising them from on high in their pulpits." Of course, this is Van Gogh being quite convenient for someone who's been so um, moral and righteous and on his path, and like um, no one else but you. I won't love anybody else except you. He suddenly becomes quite convenient. He suddenly sort of spares himself. Um, anyway, so at the bottom of page 26, the author writes, Vincent himself brought all his powers of sympathy to bear on Sien. And I think some of Vincent's feelings of compassion and whatever the sort of concoction of his emotions was, I think that was kind of projection where what he actually felt for himself. I think he kind of felt sorry for himself. He was projecting onto this woman, and of course he wanted to be loved, but I think some of that's also the the narcissism of the artist. I need to be loved. I have to be loved. Some of it's a healthy narcissism. We all do want to be loved, but um, it ends up being quite an unhealthy narcissism in the sense that um, he's loving someone in a bit of a desperate way and in a kind of an instant gratification way as well. I mean, it's almost like he instantly falls in love with Sien within a very short time of meeting her, or you could say breaking up with Key. Not that they were ever together, but yeah. So it says solidarity with this ill-treated woman meant more to him than observing conventions that forbade contact with fallen women. How well written is that? Then it goes on to say on the next page, page 27, the woman he loved was seen with an artist's eye too. And then he writes the following: Never before have I had so good a helper as this ugly question mark, question mark, question mark, faded woman. To me, she's beautiful, and I find in her the very things I need. Life has passed her by, and she has been marked by suffering and misfortune. If the earth has not been plowed, one cannot grow anything in it. She has been plowed, and for that reason, I find more in her than in a whole heap of the unplowed. Now, it's a little bit weird talking about this, but plowed is a word that he would use quite frequently with his brother as a analogy for sex, right? So he would talk about plowing a woman. That's their sort of parlance for the sexual act. And so when he says she has been plowed, um, and he says if the earth has not been plowed, one cannot grow anything in it. It's kind of a colloquial way of saying something, but he's also kind of saying that I guess she's available to him and giving generously in certain ways as well. Then the author goes on to write, Yassine's pockmarked, careworn face reminded him of a tilled field. Without a trace of irony, Van Gogh adapted her face to the biblical metaphor of sowing and reaping, the same metaphor as he used to describe his own painting. Sien became his muse. She had no mythological beauty to offer him, but her incorruptible vitality was more than sufficient compensation for any lack of literary or historical status. Now, um, I think you can go into that in a big way and you can make a big deal out of it, but it was basically a 20, what is it, 29-year-old who sort of really needed that aspect of his life. So I don't know if it's this really deep thing that is going on. Gathering place, good to see you here. Yvonne says her name was beautiful. Not likely, Stephanie, but thanks for the idea. Okay, so let's go on to this page. Before I sort of go into this, I do want to ask you guys a question, just to think about. We're gonna, and please remind me to come back to it in case I forget. So this is a period where Vincent is going to be doing a certain amount of portraits and human studies and even nudes. And the question I want to ask you is Vincent ultimately a today? So, 100 and something years later, 150, 5 odd years later, certainly based on it being 1882, say 150 years later, was Vincent, would you regard Vincent as a portrait artist or a landscape artist? Which one do you think it is? Yvonne Phillips says there was also similarity between them, the harshness of unacceptance they both experienced. Oh, in chat. Yeah, well, not likely at 10 to 3 in the morning. Stephanie says landscape. Anyway, we're going to come back to that. And now let's go on to this this letter, shall we? So I'm going to do that. And are you guys ready to get going? So he writes, "My dear Theo, I've said about writing to you several times, but I couldn't bring myself to finish the letter because I wanted to write to you about various reasons why I thought it such a natural thing for you to become a painter." And so I don't know if you guys remember in the previous couple of letters, two things were basically taking place. The one was the strange thing where he's seems to be trying to flatter his brother, but basically telling his brother he should try and become an artist, which doesn't really make too much sense. And then the other thing is he told his brother that he'd sold 12 drawings and he thought he was going to be paid immediately, and he wasn't paid. And remember, I said the drawings weren't terribly good, and I think he possibly rushed them. So now the question is, what is going to come of that? Does he eventually sell those sketches? Yvonne says, I prefer his landscapes to his portraits. I feel the same way, although some of his self-portraits, I've got one of them hanging here, by the way, are pretty good. Some of his self-portraits are pretty good. But we'll come back to that. So he's still kind of on this thing about, Theo, you should also become an artist, but something makes you think, it wouldn't really make sense for Theo to do that, because how would he look after Vincent? So it seems to be Vincent trying to ingratiate his brother and also maybe get his brother to think about what it is like practically to be an artist. And so when his brother says, no, I would never do that, it's almost like, well, I'm doing that. Maybe you would want to do that, but you can kind of do it through me. I don't know if that's what's kind of going on. Anyway, he goes on to write, but I didn't like what I'd written and I couldn't find any words that were strong enough. Your objections to becoming an artist are indeed serious, but on the other hand, there are a great many things that weigh against them. By your 30th year, so I guess he was saying, I'm too old to start becoming an artist. You could have progressed to the extent that people must respect you as a painter and take your work seriously. And in your 30th year, you'll still be young. what you've learned at Gupil, your knowledge of many things, means that you have exactly what it takes to catch up with many who started early. And that's kind of a bit of a criticism Van Gogh is experiencing, that he started late. I suppose it's not quite the same, but in the Star Wars series, you have that little boy going before the Jedi Council, and he's a small boy, maybe 8 years old, 10 years old, and they say, well, he's too old to become a Jedi. And then you look at Luke Skywalker, how old he was. I don't know, but there is the sense that Van Gogh started on his artistic journey too old, and right now he's 29 years old. He goes on to write, because those early starters often have a period of staying at the same level fruitlessly for years, and that period isn't necessary for someone who starts energetically at a later stage. So that's how he's kind of rationalizing and justifying it to himself. He's saying, I'm going to be energetic, I'm going to make up a lot of lost time, right? And I don't know if that's really true. He doesn't do a terrible amount within the first couple of years. Nothing really does stand out until he paints the Potato Eaters, which comes along quite late in the game as well. Interestingly, in this book that I mentioned earlier, it refers to him endlessly painting thatched cottages. So he goes from painting figures to weavers to thatched cottages. All of that is quite important, going through these different themes and getting a sense of what interests him, getting a knowledge of the world through the artist's eye and all that kind of thing. Stephanie says, I also prefer his landscapes. Bridget Bowman says, hi guys, I thought he disliked Tierstick's attitude so much he was maybe trying to say Theo was too nice a person to be an art dealer, just thinking of art as money. It's quite interesting. Okay, so he goes on to say painting is just as good a profession by which to earn a living as, for example, smith or doctor. An artist, in any case, is the exact opposite of someone living a life of leisure. And as I said, if one wants to draw a parallel, then either a smith or a doctor corresponds more closely. Do you guys agree with that? Do you guys agree that painting is just as respectable and just as easy and simple a way to earn a living as a doctor? Do you guys think that that's true? Because in the reality of Vincent's own life, that would turn out not to be true. He would have no money and no respectability for his entire artistic career. So that's why I say, if you look at his handwriting right next to it, some of it is pretty big. Look how big these words are here. And then some of it is tiny over here. And then it's kind of messed up. So although his writing, when you transcribe it and you type it out, sounds quite bold and sophisticated, when you see the actual handwriting, it's a 29-year-old that is still trying to find himself, right? And look, the reality with Vincent was that well, the irony, I guess, with Vincent was he achieved some status, and he achieved, I think, a breakthrough when he painted a doctor, right? When he painted Dr. Gachet, and when he, to some extent, painted his daughter. Then he says, now that you write about it, I remember very well that when you spoke to me back then about my becoming a painter, I thought it very, very inappropriate and wouldn't hear of it. So he's talking about his brother recommending to him to become a painter, and he thought that was dumb. And now he's changed his mind, right? Then he says, what made me stop doubting is that I read a clearly written book on perspective. Cassagna, I guess a book called Guide de la Habitude du Sien. And I think that's this part of the letter, right? And a week later drew an interior of a little kitchen with stove, chair, and table, and window in their place and on their legs, whereas it used to seem to me downright witchcraft or coincidence that one had depth and proper perspective in a drawing. If you drew just one thing as it should be drawn and desired to attack 1,000 other things, the desire to attack 1,000 other things would be irresistible. But the most difficult part is taking that first step. If a painter took you by the arm and said, look, Theo, this is how you should draw that field. This is how the lines of the furrows run. For this reason or that, they run like this and not otherwise, and must be brought into perspective like this, right? And you can see certain things appear to be underlined here. Let me go to the next page. So there is the reference to 1,000. I was under the impression when where there's emphasis that it's underlined, but I can't say I see too much that's underlined. Do you? Anyway, so he says, and that pollard willow, that a pollard willow is a tree where the extended branches are sort of trimmed off, cut off, and then it creates sort of a feathery appearance, beyond the amputated limb. And he's painted that quite a lot. Then he says, and that pollard willow being this big and the other one further on is by contrast that small, and that difference in size can be measured this way or that. And look, if you fling that down on paper, then the broad outlines are immediately correct and you have firm ground beneath your feet on which to continue. Such a talk, provided it's accompanied by practice, would be more appropriate in the circumstances than a lot of discussion about either abstract or financial matters. And so I won't venture further into that territory, but you're on the verge of getting an idea of the practice one day soon. And if you should happen to draw something correctly, or in short, if you learn to see things in perspective, then your art dealership has it. And you'll feel just like Correggio, I too am a painter. And then you'll see immediately that you're in your element. And then you'll be younger and more full of life than ever before. Then your second youth will begin, which is better than the first, because the second never ends. Thank God, doesn't end like the other one. But the first youth has left me and is beginning to leave you. So you can see that this is quite in a way, a deep letter, in the sense that Vincent is reflecting on being um, a young man with his youth leaving him. So he's quite aware that, I'm about to exit my 20s, and what do I have to show for it in terms of my love life? Have I found a woman that loves me? Have I experienced love? And so he's so desperate for that to happen that he kind of forces it, right, with someone who's totally inappropriate. Now, bear in mind the title of this episode is Sorrow. And you kind of got to ask the question, is he feeling sorrowful? Is Vincent van Gogh feeling sad, depressed? Um, what are other words for that? Unhappy? Um, where does this theme of sorrow come from? I think a little bit of it comes from a sense of life is running away from him. He's trying to catch up and achieve respectability. He's trying to, in the same way, he's trying to force, like, I need to be in love right now, so I'll just find someone that'll accept me. he also wants to jump into the whole business of being a respectable artist. And of course, that takes time, right? Yvonne says, if you have no perspective, you're sunk. This extends to all areas of life. So, yeah, I mean, right now, Vincent is learning to get a kind of perspective of life. And I think, well, let me ask this as a question. Do you think he does have perspective? Remember for how long he spent in books and Bibles, and he even wanted to be a teacher, right? Remember how long he spent in books and Bibles, spending all day, every day studying, right? As a younger man, as a sort of a 25, 26-year-old, right? And now he's in the real world. And would you say that he has perspective when he says things like, well, being a painter is just as good a living as being a doctor? When, what do you think his reality is at this point? And what do you think his reality is going to be for the next 8 years till the end of his life? So it's one, and I mean, it's part of the folly of youth that you talk big, that you talk a big game, you know, you fake it, I guess, until you make it. And you could argue that Gabby and Brian did something similar. You could argue that Shanann Watts did something similar. I'm talking about where you, on social media, express this idea that your life is awesome, believing that it will be, but it isn't actually at that time. You kind of get the same thing from Van Gogh here, that he believes his life's going to turn out well, believes that there's kind of hope for him, but that's all it really is. It's a wish. It's wishful thinking, right? It's talk with no substance. I'm not saying it's absolutely no substance, but there's not really much to back it up at this point. And of course, in a way, he's got to talk that way in order to get money from his brother, or maybe he thinks that. Because if he was perhaps more honest or more authentic or realistic, and he said, you know, Theo, I'm drawing, I'm not getting anywhere, I'm not selling anything. This is really quite hopeless, but I'm going to do it anyway. What do you think Theo would say? So I think it's a combination of he wants to draw, he wants Theo to help him, he wants to believe in himself, and so he can't entertain that dark side too much. So in a way, it is a difficult one. Stephanie says his perspective is skewed. Gathering Place said, I try to vote on the poll, but it doesn't allow me to select all of the above. Well, it's not all of the above, but thanks for trying. Okay, so this part's really interesting, is he talks about, as regards Cora's education and Ma's bread, those two things won't be lacking even if you become a painter. So you kind of get the sense that Theo is actually also paying for his youngest brother's education. So Theo's not only paying to help Vincent, he's also helping his other brother. And I'm not sure what the reference to Ma's bread refers to, but it suggests to some extent he may even be helping his parents. And so he's basically saying to Theo that don't worry, if you become a painter, Cora's education and Ma's bread, I guess, will take care of itself. Do you think that's true? Once again, as Stephanie says, his perspective is skewed. And so I think in that respect, also him saying a painter is just as good as a doctor in reference kind of to himself. I think you can kind of imagine Van Gogh as quite a difficult, stubborn, argumentative fellow, a guy that if you sat in a coffee shop with, you'd find yourself disagreeing with him. And you'd find that he is, in a way, his own person, but you can't really talk sense into him, and you might maybe not want to. If you did talk sense into him, he would probably not want to talk to you, kind of thing. Bridget says he has tried so hard with pastoral studies, reading, learning, art, and love, but perhaps feels defeated. He's clutching at straws. That's the reality here. He is clutching at straws. So he goes on to say, and he's kind of giving his brother advice as well at the same time. He says, and as far as you're concerned, your food, drink, sleep, your studio, your model, they aren't far off. And if the idea to paint should awaken in you, you'd see that it could be done. It could be that all of this is a big sort of covering up of a sort of indirect insult he gave his brother, where he said all art dealers are money grubbers and idiots, kind of thing, and that all of these letters are to try and sort of butter his brother up and cover up that unintentional insult that's there. Then he says, nevertheless, so that you won't suspect me of overlooking the financial side, as I'd like to say, yet with all due respect for your present position as an art dealer, unless one has a certain handicraft and can make something with his own hands, I doubt the soundness of the means of subsistence. Meaning that I consider the social position of Jaap Maris, for example, more solid and independent than that of HGT. I have a lot of respect for intellect and intelligence. If those are lacking, then one comes to naught in spite of one's handicraft, because one can't stand up and defend one's own work. You see this in Taste Maris. But it's precisely those people who have the intellect and intelligence, and it goes without saying that I count you among them, and I'd like to count myself among them too. It's fitting that they're eminently suited to handiwork. So yeah, he's talking about intellect and intelligence. Well, let me ask you guys, do you think Vincent van Gogh is an intelligent guy? Let me just put it like that first. Do you think Vincent is a intelligent person? Yvonne says, I think his hope was wonderful. If he could have only supported himself, I think he would have been respected by his peers, even if he didn't sell a lot. So do you guys think that Vincent van Gogh was intelligent? Paddy says, highly intelligent but lacking in common sense. Well, that's a great answer. That's a great answer. I think he is intelligent. Bear in mind, his brother, Cord, the youngest brother, went on to become an engineer, the one who came to South Africa. Yvonne Phillips, that's also a good point, says, I think he's educated, not always intelligent. Good point. Gathering Place says, I think he's an emotional person, not necessarily intelligent. I would kind of put it the opposite way. I would say, I think he's intelligent, but I'm not sure if he's emotionally intelligent. And if you're not emotionally intelligent, that affects your intelligence. So if you are a smart person who easily becomes emotionally compromised, if you're a smart person who easily, when you're emotional, make bad decisions, well, then you're not a very smart person. So in other words, you can't divorce intelligence from emotional intelligence. They go together. In other words, if you can make decisions when you're emotional that are intelligent, well, then that is what it comes down to. So a good example of that is tennis players who they're trying to win a game and they, for whatever reason, they get themselves into a trouble or into a hole, and maybe they hit the ball into a net or make a mistake, or something distracts them. Do they allow that emotion to compromise their game, right? And it's a little bit different because it's physical, but bear in mind there's a lot of strategy and intelligence in tennis, right? But if you think of the physical game as nevertheless a thinking game, like a chess game, and now when it comes to a critical point and you a couple of points down and it's critical that you win this point, can you deal with your emotions? Can you deal with the nervousness, the stress, the narrative surrounding that particular point? Can you put that aside and concentrate and focus? In other words, can you not be emotionally compromised by the moment? That is what separates a good tennis player from a bad. And the same applies to us. Can you make decisions when you are emotional, nervous, anxious, upset, whatever it is? And I think one of the ways that you can do that, even if you've in the past not been able to do that, is you recognize the fact that you are a bad decision maker when you're emotional. And so the next time you're emotional, you try and concentrate and remember as keen as you can, I make bad decisions when I'm emotional. And you either then focus better on your on the process of making the decision, or you say something like, I need to not make a decision right now. I need to postpone this. I need to delay this. Or I need to just take a moment and consider all the alternative decisions I can make, not just act out of, what's the word? Act out of, in other words, it's not a reaction, it's an action, it's a response, right? Um, Instead of it being a reaction, you're adapting, you're learning. That's the difference. Gathering Place says, I never had the ability to control my emotions. Stephanie says, when I'm emotional, I'm not very good at making choices. That's true of all of us. But some people are better at that. And that's, I think, to some extent why in true crime we admire psychopaths. I'm talking about true psychopaths. But even beyond true crime, admire might be the wrong word. Why we are fascinated by psychopaths, maybe why we find we are chillingly, like Hannibal Lecter. There's a weird kind of fascination for them because we're not like that, where the emotions have absolutely no way of impacting their thought process, and so they, in a certain way, ruthlessly effective thinkers. But you also have other psychopaths that are CEOs and in certain professions. I think there are a lot of journalists that are quite psychopathic. Sometimes you see someone reading on the news about someone who's died with a smile on their face. I think certain I think they say cooks, chefs, people who cut up meat and do whatever. There's a certain amount of psychopathy present there as well. But so that's the opposite side where emotions have absolutely no effect, and maybe they should have some effect, right? But the whole thing we're trying to get at here is, because Vincent van Gogh is really naive, is a kind of Brian Laundrie. He is not good at making decisions when he is emotional. And if you compare Brian Laundrie's in this relationship with Gabby, and it's not working out. You can kind of imagine, well, he could have left Gabby and just sort of gone to a prostitute or something, and maybe that could be a way that he could have resolved his pain. I don't think that's the way Brian thinks, but I'm just saying this is what Vincent van Gogh did. The other side of it is, you must remember Vincent van Gogh never really got together with Key Boss, just sort of a hypothetical thing, which I think in a way is even more painful. He never really gets to um, be with Kibos in I think, a romantic setting. They have a casual time together over the summer, but it's not actually consummated, I think, in any real way. Stephanie says, my uncle was an ER doctor. You do become desensitized. Yeah. Okay, so he goes on to write, let's just go down to here. He says, I repeat, he's still trying to talk Theo into painting. He says, I repeat, if you take up painting, you'll succeed. And by your 30th year, you as a painter will have worked your way up, no less so in any respect than at present. A mediocrity in the bad sense of the word will certainly not be the case with you if you take up painting. As regards painting, there are two lines of reasoning: how not to do it, how to do it. How to do it with much drawing and little color, how not to do it with much color and little drawing. That's quite a irony from Van Gogh, saying how you should not draw is with much color and little drawing. I mean, if you think about some of his most famous art, if you think about Wheatfield with Crows, for example, there's a heck of a lot of color in that and very little detail in a sense. I mean, it's basically yellow and blue. If you think about Wheatfield with Crows, right? Then he goes on to say, now I see the opportunity to manage very well if you can arrange it this month, as you said, namely that around the 15th, you give me another 100 francs to last until the beginning of May. So again, let's put our true crime hats on and just say, do you think that Vincent is trying to butter his brother up a little bit? Because you think about everything he said there, and then he says, let's kind of make an arrangement around the 15th. I'm not sure if he's saying every month, but it seems like he's saying around the 15th, give me 100 francs to last until the beginning of May. From the 100 francs just sent, I haven't yet been able to pay Tierstick. I have a lot of expenses, and I could wait no longer to buy a pair of trousers and pay the rent, for example. So I think you've got to see these letters to Theo not just as, how can I put it? It's not just brotherly love. It's also because have a look at, if you look at the letters by period, when he needs his brother, where is it? Over here. When he really needs his brother, which is really around this point onwards, look how many letters he's writing. When he doesn't need his brother that much, look how few letters there are, right? All right, so all I'm trying to say is there is a little bit of Van Gogh as a bit of a sleaze bag. You know, he's not this perfect, wonderful, troubled artist. He's a bit of a mischievous rogue, right? As Stephanie says, he has an agenda. Ricardo Ortiz, good to have you here. Good to have you here. Okay. So then he says, when I first came here, Kirstig and Mo were so friendly and said I didn't have to worry at all. But in less than a month, they turned around and were talking completely differently, perhaps thinking that I'd collapse. At first, that grieved me, and then later it left me rather cold, and I thought I wouldn't let it upset me anymore. Brighton is in hospital. I visit him quite often to bring him books or drawing materials. Oh, and so here you have the information regarding those sketches. He says the following. He says, CM paid me and a new order, but difficult enough, 6 detailed specific townscapes. I'll see that I make them in any case, because if I understand correctly, I'll get for these 6 as much as for the first 12, and then perhaps sketches of Amsterdam. So in a way, that's quite an unexpected response, that he did actually get paid for those sketches, but then he was told, can you don't do whatever you want to do this and that and the next thing. And of course, the question now is, are his sketches going to sell? So someone's buying them from him, but with the idea to resell them. Well, are they going to resell? That's the question. But I mean, that is quite interesting. He does get paid, assuming he's being honest here, and then talks about he's been given another commission. And bear in mind, he's saying this immediately after saying to Theo, can you give me money? Which I think raised the question, did he really get paid for these sketches? Right? I hate to do this because you sort of feel like that he is honest and that you can trust him. But there's a sort of a feeling like because he needs money, isn't he kind of talking a big game? And he's telling his brother that painting is like being a doctor. Bridget Bowman says he's learning the tricks of the trade from those he's hanging out with. That's a super insight. I mean, that's obviously a reference to Sien, right? You dress things up in a way to make them seem better than they really are, right? But he obviously is desperate for money because he's got to pay for himself, a woman who is pregnant, and a little girl as well. Let's just see what this refers to, number 7. Van Gogh worked from early April to early June on this new series of townscapes for Uncle Cor. The letter in which he says he has sent them. So CM refers to Uncle Cor, which may actually be the family helping him out. It's not so much that he's getting sort of art commissions. Timmy, come up, come. It's not so much that he's getting art commissions, but that he is that you could sort of argue that he's getting some kind of assistance from his family. Does that make sense? So he would end up drawing, for example, Sien's mother's house. Let's see if we can bring that up. Not sure why that's... So that would be one of them, one of the sketches. Okay, so there's that one. Then there's also Nursery on Schenkweg, that's this one. Can you see also with Nursery on Schenkweg, that's not a bad one. Quite amazing that this particular drawing is now in America, in Pasadena, at the Norton Simon Art Foundation. But have a look at this. Is it this one? Nursery on Schenkweg. You notice the birds flying there. So is that a sign that he's suicidal because there are birds flying in the sky, and are those crows? I must say they look to me a little bit like swallows. Then there's this one, Carpenter's Yard and Laundry. That's a pretty good sketch, wouldn't you say? That's in terms of execution, that is not bad drawing. That's really not bad drawing. Not there yet. Good to see you. Yeah, Tommy Coyote says how not to do it with much color and little drawing. That is the essence of Impressionist art. Yvonne says, Vincent thinks because he does not produce art that he is worthy of the money he asks for. Theo has said that in his letters to... he has said that in his letters to Theo. Yeah, these sketches are pretty good. He's definitely raising his game. Then there's Fish Drying Barn. There's this one. Not quite as good, but not bad. Again, birds flying in the sky. They're definitely better than the previous ones you did. Then there's another Fish Drying Barn. So I guess this must be near Scheveningen. This is in the Groningen Museum, which is, I think, an area where my family comes from, Groningen. And then there's Nursery on Schenkweg. Not bad. Once again, look at the birds flying. So it just shows you how ridiculous the wheat field with crows with birds flying in them. Well, oh, now he's suddenly suicidal. You know, you've got birds flying in a lot of his other pictures. Stephanie says he continues to improve. So of all of these sketches, which I think are pretty good, I think this is a really good one. Not that one. Is it this one? I think that's pretty good. But I think the best one is possibly that one. Do you guys agree that that's the best one of the lot? The detail is really well done. The perspective is really well done. Do you guys agree that, Timmy, stop putting your tongue on my keyboard? Yvonne says they are much more detailed. He does work on perspective. Do you guys agree that this is the best of the group? This is in the Krollermuller Museum. I've actually been to that particular museum. That's in the Netherlands. Not there, it says good balance. A day, Stephanie says, a day in the life. Yes, that is quite detailed. So I must say I'm quite impressed. This isn't too bad compared to his previous work. So he says, I'll see that I make them in any case, because if I understand correctly, I'll get for these 6 as much as for the first 12. Then he says, Blommers was here to talk about a viewing of the woodcuts. What does that refer to? Okay. Sat there looking at them for 3 hours and was angry because Pulcre's board, that's I think an art schools or art academies board, had complained about those things one sees. And then in the Zuid-Holland's coffee house, that South Holland coffee house, what does this refer to? Yeah, the South Holland Coffee House, popularly known as Het Zuid, had opened in 1882 at Haagse Grunmarkt. Goes on to say, if that's all they knew about wood engraving, they're indeed competent to condemn. Still, Pulcre's board had complained. Then he says, this not keeping abreast of things is part of what some of them call their general education. Good luck to them. Now with a handshake, ever yours, Vincent. So he's being quite brazen, quite bold, quite insulting, quite nasty. You get the sense that he's starting to feel a fluctuating sense of confidence as an artist, but also, well, because it's fluctuating, he doesn't necessarily always like certain authority figures in the art world. I certainly felt the same way as a writer, especially as an emerging writer, developing basically a hatred for editors, and which I've got to say I still have today. Then he says, now with a handshake, ever yours, Vincent. Then he says, accept my thanks for a wonderful box of Ingress paper and for the studies. One fine day when people start to say that I can in fact draw but not paint, perhaps I'll appear with a painting just when they least expect it. This is quite a interesting statement he's making, given what we know about Van Gogh, right? Given the hinge of history. One fine day when people start to say that I can in fact draw but not paint, perhaps I'll appear with a painting just when they least expect it. But as long as it looks as though I must do it and may not do anything else, then I certainly won't do it. Okay, so that's that letter. Now we go on to, so we go from the 2nd of April to the next letter, and that's on the 6th of April, and that is this particular letter. You can see this letter is far executed in a far better way. It's neater, it's more legible. There's no crossing out on this particular page. This page is also done quite well, just a singular word crossed out there. A little bit of a mess over here. But all in all, quite a neatly written letter. And then it ends off with this sketch, which he titles The Great Lady, right? So let's go through this letter. How long is it? See, that is the other thing with trying to go through these letters. All of them are quite long. So April 1882, my dear Theo, it shouldn't surprise you that I wrote you, become a painter. So he's still on the same topic. For I myself am now in a period in which I'm deriving some benefit from my earlier worries. Because as things are now, every week I make one thing or another that I couldn't make before, and that's what I spoke about. And that's as though one were young again. And it's the awareness that nothing except sickness can rob me of the strength that's now beginning to develop. It's quite interesting that he makes this reference to sickness because in about 2 months he's going to be in hospital. So it makes one wonder, is he aware um, of his health that is sort of declining kind of thing? So he goes on to say, awareness gives me faith in the future and enables me to bear many unpleasantnesses in the present. It's a wonderful thing to look at something and find it beautiful, to reflect on it and hold it fast, and then to say, I'm going to draw that, and then to work on it until it's done. What do you think that is a reference to when he says it's a wonderful thing to look at something and find it beautiful and to reflect on it and hold it fast? What do you think he means by hold it fast? And then to say, I'm going to draw that and then to work on it until it's done. You think he's talking generally or specifically? Then he says, obviously, that's why I'm not yet content with my work to the extent that I needn't do it any better. But the way to do it better later is to do it as well as one can today. There can't be anything but progress tomorrow. That's quite an interesting reference in itself because Van Gogh was a very an artist with an incredible turnaround, right? Um, he was unusually prolific artist, but also an artist who is very rapid in his execution. And so you can see already he has that psychology 8 years before the end of his artistic career. So it's there from the beginning. He's kind of just decided, I need to do this quickly. I had a similar thing with writing when I started writing books and articles. I felt like I'm really behind. My life has gotten off to a slow start. I need to make up time, and that was the reason that I wrote in a hurry, and that led to me writing incredibly quickly. Sometimes writing a book in 10 days, and you might say it was probably a terrible book, but it was often quite well executed. And I think my advice to someone who wants to become a writer is write a lot and write fast, because you can't be fluffy and you can't well, you will stop going down tangents when you're trying to write a lot in a short time. You feel like you're wasting your own time. So you become an effective artist and writer when you try and execute it effectively and efficiently. I mean, when you speed up the process of doing it, you've got to become more efficient at it. Yeah, you're right, Paddy. I was a machine. I don't know what I am now. Trying to become a machine in terms of fitness and sport. get that machine up and running again. Excuse the pun. Then he says, naturally, I don't know what you'll think of my drawings when you finally see them, but this much I do know. I'm greatly longing for you to come. Not quite sure what that is a reference to. Okay, so it goes on to say, and if I write to you, become a painter, then it really isn't because I think that in your present position, there isn't a very great deal that's beautiful. So he's still on the same damn topic. He says, but I find being a painter more beautiful, and I wish you worked in your own studio instead of at a reading desk in the office. There you have it. I know for certain that something would awaken in you in your own studio, which you don't know of now, a huge hidden force of working and creating. So I don't know about you, but at what point is he going to bring up money in this letter, right? Or isn't he? So he says, and once it's awake for good. When I hear Tierstick talking about agreeableness and saleability, I can only think work one has slaved away at and done one's best to imbue with character and sentiment can be neither disagreeable nor unsaleable. So he's saying he's done his best to imbue his work with character and sentiment. That is a really good point. And I think the thing to bear in mind here is no matter what you think of Van Gogh as a person, and no matter what you think of his actual art, he does end up more than succeeding. Obviously, what's the word? Post, what do they call it? When you get like an Academy Award after you've died, like Heath Ledger, post. What's the word for that? I'm going to have to Google it. I hate it when I can't remember a word. Posthumous. Posthumous. Posthumous, yeah, posthumous Oscar. I mean, Van Gogh obviously got his success posthumously, but it's nevertheless something that he earned and I think deserved. So if we come back to the poll, where does the title for this episode come from? 15% say because he was struggling. Might be a little part of it. Their father died in April 1882. 10% say that that's not true. It had to do with Sien. 15% say that. 61% say all of the above. So that's definitely not the case. So if you said all of the above, that's not the case. Okay. Thanks, Paddy. And not there yet. And not, yeah, that's not the one, Tommy. Okay, so let's continue. Then he talks about what wonderful weather we're having. There's spring in everything. I can't let go of the figure. That's number one for me. But sometimes I can't keep myself from going outdoors. But I'm busy with difficult things that I can't let slide. So again, I want to remind you of this question, which is Vincent a landscape artist to you or a portrait artist? Just think about that. And also, is he a landscape artist in his own mind, or is he a portrait artist in his own mind? Okay. Then he says, recently I've been making many studies of parts of the figure, heads, neck, breast, shoulder, Who do you think is his model for that? See the enclosed scratch. So I guess that's this one. And then he says, I'd very much like to make more studies of the nude. You know, I've drawn the exercises off for Sien several times even, but they don't include any female figures. Okay. Of course, doing it from life is something entirely different, I'm sure. A little drawing like the enclosed is simple enough in line, but it's difficult enough to capture those simple characteristic lines when one is sitting in front of the model. Those lines are now so simple that one can outline them with a pen. But I repeat, the problem is finding those broad lines so that one can say what's essential with a. So he's trying to be almost a minimalist. He's trying to say what he's trying to say just with a few lines, right? Look how few lines he has with a face as well. Look how the hair is quite square. It almost looks like she's wearing, it's almost like this isn't hair, it is something else. Anyway. It says choosing the lines in such a way that it's obvious, as it were, that they must run this. That's something that isn't obvious, however. I'm not quite sure why this is so big and how to get rid of it. Because there's something underneath that now. Anyway. It's true, Theo, that recently, since I've been in The Hague, so now he's talking about money. So now he says, it's true, Theo, that since I've been in The Hague, I've spent more than 100 francs a month, but I didn't do that. But if I didn't do that, I couldn't work with the model and would remain at the same level, making no progress. So I want you guys to think about this and ask yourself if he's being a little economical with the truth here. I want you to think about this statement and ask yourself, is he telling the truth? And if so, is he being a little economical with the truth? Gathering places, when I was young, a man approached me to model for him. All I thought was Ted Bundy. Do you know where that man is now? Maybe it's a famous artist. Paddy says he succeeded beyond his wildest dreams. So if you think about it, he's saying that this money that his brother's giving him is allowing him to work with the model. Well, it is, but not quite. Sien isn't really his model. You could say she is, but it's really his girlfriend who's also modeling for him. I don't think, I mean, the full story is Theo, I've got a model who's moved in. Her daughter's also moved in. Also, she's pregnant. Also, I'm also paying for a couple of cups of coffee and porridge and a couple of meals. And sometimes she needs a new pair of shoes. Oh, and she is modeling for me quite often. Thanks a lot. Yeah, so Stephanie says he's not being completely honest. Not there yet. Says I'm a bit behind. What was Van Gogh's intention in sharing this with Theo? Timmy, can I put you on the ground? Okay, thank you. Okay, so Yvonne says I sat as a model once, fully clothed. One painting was horrible, one was wonderful. I don't know what happened to those painters, probably still painting. So not there yet says, what was Vincent's intention in sharing this with Theo? Well, I don't know what your answer is to that, but I guess it's, what do you mean, sharing what? Not quite sure what you mean with that. Anyway, then he says, I see this in other painters. Oh no, that's not. Oh, so he's now talking about progressing. Well, I think one thing that you can agree with is Vincent is progressing, right? He is improving. And maybe it's because he's quite happy in a way. He's not in the happiest, most fairy tale scenario, but he is not alone, and he's to some extent settled. To some extent, there's the resemblance of a family, right? For him. Then he talks about models that are afraid, or artists that are afraid to take a model regularly, and they work little and slowly, if only if it worked good anyway. Brighton has been taking a model again lately, though, and there was, of course, more spirit in his work, but then he fell ill. Again, you've got to ask yourself, isn't Vincent about to follow in Brighton's footsteps? He takes a model. Um, it's quite interesting the way he frames it. Takes a model, but then he falls ill. Well, is the illness got anything to do with the model? The English painter, certainly the draftsman for the graphic and see, I think that's a magazine, have a model every day. Without that, it really doesn't work, in my opinion. Now, it's quite interesting here that they say it's not known how Van Gogh acquired this information. One can speculate that he's actually sucking this out of his thumb, that it may not be true. Anyway, he goes on to say, if someone with many years of experience draws figures from the imagination after a great deal of study, fine. But to work systematically from the imagination seems overly rash to me. Israels and Blommers and Nieuhuis don't do that. So again, he's justifying the models. He's kind of saying, I need more money because I need to draw models, right? Then he's back to the money and he says, I've spent more than 100 francs a month here. It's because it's not possible to spend less, no doubt. I do wish I didn't have to give Tierstig the 25 guilders back yet, because I really need the money to be able to go on working energetically. Working energetically or doing something else energetically. Tierstig is none the poorer by it, and in the beginning he himself said that I needn't worry about it, even though every 25 guilders less means that my work suffers and that I can't do what really needs to be done. I think you mean to say what I really want to do. Then he says, if I fill my portfolios with studies, I'll get my money's worth out of them later. And I'd rather earn a bit more later than now. I'd rather see to it that I'm equal to my profession than rush to sell a drawing by the grace of God. The enclosed drawing was scratched after a larger study, which has a more somber expression. There's a poem by Tom Hood, I believe, in which he tells of a great lady. So that's where he gets the title for the great lady. I don't know if you saw that over there. Who can't sleep at night because during the day, when she went out to buy a frock, she saw the poor seamstress's pale, consumptive, emaciated, working in an airless room. And now she has twinges of remorse about her wealth and wakes up at night in panic. In short, it's a slender white female figure, restless in the dark night. If I must, I'll talk no more about it and give Tierstig the 25 guilders when you send money again. But it could be, if it could be arranged, I'd prefer to wait until he takes a drawing for it later, because now I definitely need as much money as I can possibly spare for my studies. So again, just to emphasize, Vincent has never spoken as much about needing money as he is now. And where do you think the need for that money is coming from? Well, we know. But it's not that long ago when he was in the Borinage that he really didn't want money, where he really wasn't interested in money. right? So it's again just another side to Vincent coming out. It's kind of Vincent who wants to play family, or who wants to indulge certain appetites, is needing someone to be his sponsor. Another thing that I think is interesting is, if you imagine that Van Gogh was alive right now, right? So if you take all of this from 1882 and you transplanted it directly into the now, and you had Vincent van Gogh kind of, instead of writing letters to Theo, started a Patreon site, do you think he would be successful? What do you guys think of that? Literally, Van Gogh kind of didn't have Theo, but he was instead of 1882, it was 2022, and he kind of he wanted to, what's the word, make a success the way a lot of other people do. Do you think he would have done well on Patreon if these letters were instead sort of blog posts, and he was sort of saying to Patreon, basically, can you give me some more money? I'm looking after, well, I've got a model, and these are my sketches. Do you think he would have, how well do you think he would have done on Patreon? Stephanie says, send money, send money, send money. No. I quite like that comment from Stephanie. I think his agenda was to be sent more money. Yvonne Phillips says, well, he wasn't much of a businessman, so no. So anyway, that's the end of this letter. He says, anyway, it seems to me that tear stick won't be so severe as not to understand that at the moment 25 guilders are worth more to me than they are to his honor. You kind of get the sense that he's kind of being quite a jerk. It's almost like he's saying to his brother, you know what, I owe tear stick this money. Can you sort of can you pay for it, right? He's kind of belaboring the point. Can you pay for this money that I owe, kind of thing. Then he goes on to say, anyway, it seems to me that tear stick won't be so severe as to understand that at the moment 25 guilders are worth more to me than they are to his honor. Well, I wish you well, and remember, I hope you're working in your own studio in the near future. It needn't happen too quickly, but I believe that after a relatively short time of worry, you'd be happier once and for all. Adieu, ever yours, Vincent. Then he says, P.S. I don't have many studies of the nude yet, but there are some that bear a very close resemblance to the bogs. Are they therefore less original? Perhaps it's because I learned to look at nature through the bogs. So yeah, this postscript was written in pencil. And then that's that sketch that we have looked at. Okay, so now we go on to the next letter. Do you see how long it's taking to get through these letters, and they're sort of repeating the same thing? Can you send me money, and all the crap about, it's not terribly authentic in a way. Okay, so this is the next letter. This one is written in pencil. And once again, you can see it's actually quite well executed. It's neat. It's there he's underlined something, it looks like. There he refers to melee. Look at the flourish in his letter D. Look at that sort of flourish. Here's the next page. a little bit more untidy, but still not bad. Again, notice the difference in the size of some letters. Look how huge that B is and how tiny some of these other words are. Then there's a little bit of scratching out here. Also, again, look how big those words are and how tiny some of these are, right? So then he signs it off, and then I guess this is a postscript again with some more scratching out. Now, all of this shows that he's still finding himself as a person. The writing is fluctuating in size. Also, that he's oscillating in his identity. And by the way, I saw the same thing with Amber Heard's handwriting, which at times you couldn't even recognize it was so different. But also in terms of size, you definitely saw those oscillations with Amber Heard, which I thought was quite interesting. Not there, it says a bit grandiose, stressing his value. Yeah, I mean, some of it is pretty big handwriting. Patty says, what a gift to have all these letters. The thing that's, I think, quite interesting with the fact that we actually have these letters is that somebody actually kept them. So whatever Theo thought of Vincent, he ended up keeping his brother's letters, which is quite a gesture on its own. It's definitely quite a gesture on its own. Okay, so this is for once not a very long letter. So he writes on the 10th of April, Dear Theo, today I sent you one drawing by post, which I'm sending to you as a token of gratitude for so much that you've done for me during this otherwise hard winter. Last summer, when I had that large woodcut by Millet, the shepherdess, I thought how much one can do with one single line. Naturally, I don't presume to say as much as Millet with a single outline. So this is really just a letter of thanks. There's a reference to Millet, and there's another one. Then he says, but nevertheless, try to put some sentiment into this figure. Now I only hope that this figure is to your liking. And now you see at the same time that I'm hard at work. Now that I've started, I'd like to make around 30 studies of the nude. So he's really getting into nudes. The enclosed is, I think, the best figure I've drawn. That's why I thought I'd send it to you. This isn't the study from the model, and yet it's directly from the model. You should know that I had 2 sheets underneath my paper. Well, I toiled to get the outlines right, and when I took the drawing off the plank, it was very cleanly expressed on the 2 underlying sheets. And then I immediately worked it up after the first study so that this one is even fresher than the first. Okay, we are now here. I've kept the other 2 and wouldn't like to part with them. At the same time, you'll see from this that it isn't without reason that I wrote to you that I wish the money for HGT could wait. That's tear stick. I need it so much myself now, and working hard with the model seems to be the quickest way of getting right on top of it. Let's have a look at this. So Van Gogh had 3 versions of sorrow, the actual study and 2 copies made by tracing over his hard lines. So let's have a look at this one. So there's another one. There's a bit of evidence here that she's pregnant, I think. And then there's that one where it's the same figure sort of sitting outside. it's written here, it's unlikely that Vincent sent Theo the last version. In the following letter, he specifically mentions a pencil drawing and advises Theo to consider applying milk as a fixative. And then there's this version. Okay, so it's that one. Okay, so then he says, the model I have isn't at all expensive, but because the expense recurs day after day, it's often difficult for me to pay for it. So there's a very clear reference to, or it's a very clear, what's the word, sign that he's being economical with the truth, right? Stephanie says, thank you for this unexpected live. I was hoping you'd have one and I'd be here for it. Thanks a lot, Stephanie. Go Batman, thank you. So this is just a kind of a sign that Van Gogh is not completely honest. Then he says, anyway, arrange it as best as you can, but if it's convenient for you, send what you spoke of not too late in the month. Adieu with a handshake. Ever yours, Vincent. Then he says, it seems to me that this drawing would do well in a simple grey mount. Then he says, naturally, I don't always draw like this, but I'm extremely fond of those English drawings that are done in this style. In this style, Van Gogh must have meant likewise working with a rather heavy dose of socio-realist sentiment. Anyway, he goes on to say, so no wonder that I've tried to do the same for once, and because it was for you who understands these things, I didn't hesitate to be somewhat melancholy. I wanted to say something like, but the heart's emptiness remains, that nothing will make full again, as it says in Michelet's book. I don't know if it's really as thoughtful as he's making it out to be. I think it was literally Sien was upset. Maybe he asked her to pose for him and then she became upset and then he drew that kind of thing. You can imagine that in the situation she was, she wouldn't really have cared not to have her clothes on, and also been regularly upset given her situation and her circumstances. Kathy says, okay, I'm glad you've changed your name. Thanks a lot. Okay, so let's go on to the next letter, written 4 days later. And you know what? I really think one of the reasons why there are so many letters is because he's asking for money so often. That's kind of the main reason for that. It's not really to report news or because something's happened. It's asking for money, asking for money. So again, this letter written on the 12th of April, there you can see it. You can see how well it starts off. It's done quite neatly, and then it devolves, and then here it becomes a bit more chaotic, something scratched out there. You can see some variation here is written up in the margin there, but you can see how it starts off very legible and then it kind of disintegrates. Here's the next page. It's even more scratched out and messy. Again, look at the variation in the size of the handwriting. Very big, and also, well, that's written in between lines. But this is Van Gogh, who's becoming quite dishonest and opportunistic. Yeah, he's underlined some things. See, that looks like a reference to the actual word sorrow, right? If you compare the end of this letter, the handwriting at the end, to the beginning. I mean, it's like chalk and cheese. Look at that beginning. Look how well Hardy's tried to make it neat. And then by the end, look at it, right? And he wastes no time in saying, I received your letter with 150 francs enclosed in good order, and thank you for it most sincerely. So really, all of this is really about money, right? You can almost just get the idea that for poor Theo, it eventually just became, he just kind of became like an ATM. It's like, okay, the card is, when he got a letter from Vincent, was like the card going into the ATM. Okay, well, you know, I've gotten a letter, here comes your money, kind of thing. Stephanie says a little reprieve from the news and true crime, for sure. So he says, I'm very glad that you saw something in the drawing I sent. I also thought there was something in it. I'd very much like you to have a small, simple grey mount put around it because it will look best in that. In addition, I found something you said about the look of some drawings. Then he says, I believe, though, that this curious effect, which connoisseurs set great store by, rightly so in my opinion, is caused in drawings, not in etchings, of course, since there it's the blur of the plate. So let's go down a little bit. He says, to achieve that particular underblurred, I think it should be underblurred look, one should use not chalk. One should use not chalk, I believe, but rather charcoal that has been soaked in linseed oil first. Of course, I immediately returned the 25 guilders to Mr. Tierstick, and received a receipt for it without one word being said. So obviously Tierstick was quite annoyed. I'm just trying to see where in his letter you have these all caps. I think it's possibly page 2. Unless she's underlined it. I don't see it here. So again, I don't know how they can emphasize this here when it doesn't seem really to be emphasized there. Quite odd in a way. It may be that his honor speaks of being offended, but I'd rather he considered for once how it must have offended me to hear again and again things like, you don't earn your bread, or you've lost your rights, or you should have been given a slap in the face, and I don't know what all. So he's getting some pushback from the people around him. Tierstig is his former boss, and he isn't like being lectured, but bear in mind, they do know, or they probably suspect what he's up to in terms of with Sien, and they don't really like it. He is kind of double dealing with his brother as well, right? Gathering place, sorry that you're not feeling very well. Hope you feel better. Yvonne says, Theo must have dreaded receiving Vincent's letters. I think there were times when he did, but not always. Gathering place, really sorry that you're unwell, but I'm glad that the chat is helping you feel better. Anyway, I hope you accept our hugs from us and our thoughts as well. Gathering place says, it's been a long recovery from my second dance with COVID. Gathering place, have you had any vaccinations? I actually just had SMS saying it's been 120 days since your last booster, which is my third. And I asked a friend of mine, are you going to go? And he was like, well, I stopped after my second. So Don't know what you think of that, Stephanie, but I think I am going to go for my fourth, probably tomorrow, the next day. Anyway, he goes on to say, so he's talking about these insults he's getting from other people. You're not earning your bread, which is not. You've lost your rights, so you can't kind of stand up for certain things because of the position you're in. You should have been slapped in the face, etc., etc. And then he says, you see, truly, things like that certainly offend not less, but infinitely more than what I said to his honor. Things like that sometimes cut right through one and sting one to the quick. So here he is admitting to being quite hurt by what has been said. And so you kind of get a sense that that is the role Sien is playing in all this. That although he sees a broken woman, he I think in a sense his compassion for her is in a weird way a kind of projection, a kind of compassion for himself, a kind of feeling sorry for himself in a way. Also that he's feeling so stung and hurt by so many different things that he's just looking for some place where he can get a bit of comfort and perhaps kindness and perhaps also care, right? Okay, so it goes on to say, as to whether his honor buys or not, I consider that an entirely different matter and one that ought to be completely separate from personal disputes or differences of opinion about this or that. Whether his honor buys or not depends, I should think, not on my person but on my work. Let him buy my work or not, according to whether I progress or whether or not he wants it, either for himself or for another art lover. But it's not exactly fair to let a personal antipathy influence the judgment of a work, or conversely, to let oneself be led by the personal appeal of this artist or that to overlook the faults of his work. There is, to be sure, a connection between a person and his work, and it's not easy to define the nature of that connection, and many are badly mistaken about it. And then it says here, and well, yes, I know that Ma is ill, and I also know many more somber things, both in our own and in other families. So it seems like at this point their mother is ill. Stephanie says, I do recommend it. My uncle just got his second booster and then got COVID, and I think it's definitely helped his symptoms. Okay, will do. Okay, so their mother is ill. Okay, that's not what I wanted to do. That's Anna Cornelia van Gogh Carbentus. And by the way, Vincent's mother was actually from quite a wealthy family. Then he says, I'm not insensitive to them, and it seems to me that I couldn't draw sorrow if I didn't feel it myself. Well, there you have it. I couldn't draw sorrow if I didn't feel it myself. So remember what I said about projection. He definitely is feeling, like people say, you look like I feel, or I often say, I feel like this weather, like this weather looks, or this weather looks like I feel. That definitely is the case here. Okay, and then he says, even so, since last summer, it's become very clear to me that the disharmony between Pa and Ma and me has become a chronic condition, because for far too long there was estrangement and a great deal of misunderstanding between us, so that now it's come to the point that we must suffer for it on both sides. So one wonders whether their mother is ill as a result of the stress and strain and anxiety and worries dealing with their eldest son. Sharon says, I'm due for my fourth. I'm afraid to, because I don't feel myself since getting the first vaccine. Wow, okay. Okay, so we go a bit further. I mean, Pa and Ma could have done more for me. I could have done more for Pa and Ma if we tried much earlier on both sides to live with one another and to share the good and the bad, always remembering that parents and children must remain united. Well, neither Pa and Ma nor I made those mistakes intentionally, and they can be attributed in very large measure to the force majeure of difficult circumstances and a hectic life. As it is now, I'm half a stranger and half a tiresome person, and precious little else to Pa and Ma. And for my part, I have an empty, lonely feeling at home. That's quite a deep statement from him. Yvonne says the lines in the family are drawn. Um, so we go on. Our ways of thinking and occupations are so different that we hinder one another without either the one or the other meaning to do so. But I repeat, completely unintentionally. That is indeed a very dismal affair, but the world and life are full of such relationships, and oh, it's actually useless and in fact injurious for us, no matter who we are, to reproach one another for it. And sometimes it's best to avoid one another in such a case. I don't know, though, if this would be best or if something else would be better. I wish I knew. Well, Pa and Ma find much comfort in their work and I in mine. Because, old chap, I work with a great deal of pleasure, despite the petty vexations. I'm sure, Vincent, I'm sure. I've just received a letter from Rappard, was at odds with him for a while, but now we're both interested in each other's work again. So there's a little bit of an admission that he's kind of arguing with quite a few people, isn't he? Um, in all likelihood, he'll come to see me soon. Went recently to see Blommers in his studio. The viewing of woodcuts didn't take place after all, but I actually benefited by it in that I finally got round to sorting them out and putting them in order. Still, it's impossible for me to put enough time or effort into finding them, since I'm more engrossed in drawing every day. Made another study of the nude today, a kneeling female figure, and yesterday the pose of a woman knitting, but also nude, as I wrote to you earlier that I wanted to do. So again, no medals, no naughty badges for guessing who that is. Ricardo, thanks very much for that. So um, have you noticed that in these particular letters, he's not doing that thing he used to do so beautifully and so poetically. Remember, almost every letter he would write about some moment. He would draw a picture with words where he'd talk about the light on a puddle or a rainstorm or the view from his window. But he would kind of sketch a moment from his reality that would be really graphic and clear. He would talk about some scene, some either rural scene or a bridge or some moment, and that's kind of missing from this. Now he's become very practical and, as I say, a bit of a jerk. It's kind of a lot more superficial in a sense. Um, Okay, so let's go on. Then he says, well, sleep well. It's deep in the night. Thanks again for what you sent. And believe me, with a handshake, ever yours, Vincent. I hope to make you a pendant to sorrow. Okay, so then we go on to letter 218. So is this written 6 days later? So 5 days later, from the 14th of April to the 19th of April. And I think we'll stop here. I think we will make this the last letter. I would have liked to have gotten into May, but I'm not going to go over 2 hours. So this letter is quite, again, look at that. You kind of got to ask the question, why doesn't he? So there you can see a few underlined words, but why doesn't he just start a completely new letter, given what he's done there? Why doesn't he start a new letter? And the answer is because he's quite careless and reckless, and he's not trying that hard to be neat. He's not that careful. He's not that considerate in terms of his letter to his brother. This page is quite a lot neater. There is a scratched out word. A lot of the words on this page are similarly sized. And then there's the last page with a postscript. If you look at his signature, do you think that he thinks quite a lot of himself? Well, the V is pretty big. And that underlining of his name is pretty big as well. I certainly don't think it's a case that he doesn't think much of himself. I wonder what you guys think. Okay, so let's go through this letter. My dear Theo, today I sent one drawing of kitchen gardens in Laan van Meerdervoort. So now you have a figure of mine and a landscape. Now, do you guys remember the question that I asked at the beginning? And the question was, does Van Gogh, is Van Gogh a landscape artist, or is he a portrait artist, right? So here he talks about both. He says, and I think you'll see that I'm not staying at the same level, even though this is only white and black and unsaleable, question mark, question mark, question mark, and disagreeable, question mark, question mark, question mark. I still hope that there may be something strong in it. So you can see that he's definitely sort of agitated. He's not happy with what society thinks of himself. He's rebelling. He's pushing back. He's got this attitude of it's water off a duck's back, or I don't care what you think, right? He says, I still hope that there may be something strong in it. And I think that far from holding it against me for devoting myself specifically to drawing things, one can see it as definite proof that I'm taking the most practical path, considering that one can more easily go from drawing to painting than the other way around, making paintings without drawing the necessary studies. It does go without saying that it gives me great displeasure and doesn't make my life any easier when those whose sympathy I more or less thought I could count on, such as Mauve and HGT, become indifferent or hostile or hateful. I don't know if you guys have noticed here, but Van Gogh is in The Hague basically to be Mauve's protege. Is in The Hague to get tutelage, to be taught by Mauve, and now you're never hearing about Mauve. Mauve has sort of exited the building, right? Stephanie says Vincent goes through phases. He was working on landscapes and getting the lines right, and now spending much of his energy working on portraits. Yvonne says, yes, his letters were like a beautiful painting in the beginning. Yeah, so that's kind of missing. And then he kind of admits, he says, I haven't heard anything from Mauve. Sometimes he's ill, at other times he needs to rest or he's too busy. How beautiful his painting for the salon was. But you understand these things yourself, so enough of this. But what he's kind of acknowledging is that even Mauve, who's been quite a solid person that he could count on, is now a bit standoffish to Van Gogh. And what do you think the reason is for that? Why do you think Mauve and him aren't really getting along? Do you think it's because his art isn't so good, or do you think there's another reason? Then he says, this little drawing also needs a grey mount. You write that you've moved house. I'll do my best to make something now and then for the walls of your new home. So I presume that Theo has moved into a better home. I could be wrong, but you would imagine that Theo is actually doing quite well for himself. He's not moving because he doesn't have money. He's moving because he does have money. Theo in Paris had moved to 25 Rue Laval, also called Rue de Laval, now Rue Victor Massé, in the 9th arrondissement. The exact date of this move is not known, but it definitely took place at the beginning of April. Theo lived in this address until June 1886. Now, if you know your history of the Van Gogh family, you know that that they moved again. There's another move. I'm just trying to think. You also know that Van Gogh moved in with Theo, but I'm just saying that there was a move taking place with Joe that also took place, and that is expressed kind of much later in the letters. So there were quite a few moves in Paris with Theo from one place to the next as his circumstances changed. This was one of them. Then he goes on to say, I'm just going to skip the next part. He says, though I haven't moved, I've nevertheless made a change in my house by having a bedroom partitioned off in the attic. So I now have more room in my studio, and more so because the stove is gone. So there's a little bit of a reference to his home situation. Certainly not much, though. So yeah, it's just a reference that it was customary of the Dutch to dismantle stoves in the spring so that the rooms became larger. And then it says here, the stove of the studio is visible in the following drawings. Okay. Then he says, drawing, you see, involves all kinds of things that many would prefer to disregard. There's the true perspective of an interior. For example, sometimes I'll send you one of those as well. They are the broad outlines of a landscape. And as for me, I see no chance of success without studying the nude. That's quite a bold statement and quite a weird statement, I think. Tommy Coyote says, thanks a lot for that, Tommy. Appreciate that. Thank you. Yeah, I've just got a bit of a cough, just a bit of a dry throat, I think. That's quite a statement. I see no chance of success without studying the nude. Well, I think he's really just saying, I insist on seeing nudes, on being with nudes, and of drawing nudes. That sort of seems to be what he's saying. Then he says, all of that is essentially drawing. Much is clarified when one has mastered that to some extent. And I, for my part, go calmly on my way, knowing that if I persevere, Before long, I'll overtake those who think they can skip over such things. Again, a very sort of portentous thing that he's saying here, where he's just saying, I know if I just keep going at it, I'll overtake others. And that did turn out to be absolutely true. Of course, not quite on the timeline that Van Gogh is possibly thinking about. Then he says, I wish you the best. It's very bleak and windy here, which I find particularly annoying because I can't get on with the townscapes for Sien, which I'd otherwise capture in my spare moments. But surely it will become mild again with and then he says, with a handshake, ever yours, Vincent. Again, a very rare reference to ordinary things annoying him. It's often people that annoys him. Yeah, he's talking about the weather annoying him. But one actually wonders whether this doesn't actually do him some good. In fact, in other words, the weather interrupting his drawing, which forces him to spend a bit more time on it, and then as a result, they're a lot better. So one wonders whether it wasn't a blessing in disguise that you had these bleak, windy days interrupting what would have otherwise been perhaps a too rapid execution. Yvonne says it's both. Mauve has distanced himself. The art is not sellable and his lifestyle is unrespectable, even to the art community, and everyone is tired of lending him money. Another thing, Yvonne, I don't know if you know this, you probably do, is that Vincent is dressing not very well. He sort of dresses like a blue-collar worker, and the art community don't like that either. They sort of feel like he's not one of them, right? Not there yet, says Vincent van Gogh has become annoying. No, I mean, Vincent is annoyed with the weather. It's not something he often talks about. Stephanie says, go Batman, I will value your correspondence more than any gift. Terry Dean, while you're only joining us now, I'm about to end here, so maybe just for your benefit, I'll do one more letter. My voice is not doing very well, and I'm out of one glass of water, and I've got about one sip left from the other. So that's it. So anyway, ever yours, Vincent. Perhaps more effort went into this drawing than into many a watercolor. Okay, so shall I do one more letter? Are you guys happy with that? And then remind me to answer this question about, or to address this question about landscape versus is Vincent van Gogh a landscape artist or a portrait artist? If you want to follow, this from the actual website, it's from Web Exhibits. Don't actually know why that is now happened. This one is actually from Van Gogh Letters. Well, I'm actually not following from the one that I thought I was following from. I normally actually follow from this one. Sorry, from that one. Which is would have been this. Oh no, am I following from what I'm thinking of? I'm a little bit confused now. Let's just have a look at. Now, this is not quite what I thought I was following from. I thought I was following from these letters, which look very different. As you can see, it looks very, very different. So this is 15th to the 27th of April. I just want to have a look at this one. 21st of April. I just want to have a look here where he says, I sometimes think to myself, if only my life were a bit easier. And then here he writes, no, this is an old letter. Yeah, so these are the same letters. I sometimes think to myself, if only life were a bit easier. And so this is from a different source to this one. If you want to follow it, this is from Web Exhibits. And obviously, if you want to continue reading, you can go on from here. But this is the irrelevant painting. It's actually not bad. It's not great, but it's also not terrible. Stephanie says, I prefer the web exhibits. Okay, well, we're going to go back to web exhibits. It definitely is easier to read the letters. I don't know, it's just a little bit more clear, but you do sometimes get some decent background from the other site, and you can obviously look at the letters as well, such as this one. So here you get the idea that he wrote on separate lines here. You can see here the handwriting is very, very small, and it's the same size. And then here it gets bigger again, then it gets smaller and smaller and smaller. Also quite an untidy letter. You can see there's an attempt here to be tidy, only for it to end up being untidy again. He's trying to be tidy, but he's failing. And then that's the last page. Look how big that word is. And underlined like severely. Look how that one's, compare the size of this word and these. You can see he's quite an intense guy, right? Okay, so let's go to web exhibits. I think it's this one. Also gives you a quick idea of how long the letter is going to be. And then, is that the end of April? Please tell me it is. No, it's not. There's another letter in April. And then another letter. And then we eventually get to May. And then he does this sketch on tree roots, which is not terribly good, I don't think. See, this is why we are going to have to jump ahead, just because not much is really happening. It's just really Vincent asking for money over and over again. Yeah, Stephanie says the other one is good to see his handwriting. Terry says, if life were easier, would it be as rewarding? Okay, so let's deal with this letter. The reason I want to get to June is because it's where he ends up in hospital, and that is a major moment in his life, but maybe we must skip May. I don't really want to, but I don't know. I do want to deal with June, where he goes into hospital, and how his brother responds and how his family responds, because his parents actually come to see him. And then jump 6 months to the end of the year. That's sort of the way I want to deal with it. Go Batman, are you trying to say something to me? I see you just say TCRS. It's not there. It says it's usually the second born to go drift from the family, but Vincent was the oldest child. Curious, in my opinion. In a weird way, Vincent acted like a middle child. It was almost like his brother acted like the elder, and I think Vincent's problem was, in a way, was that he quit his job at Goupil. You could also argue that it was a mistake, or it didn't help Van Gogh being sent to England, because he wasn't very happy there. He was happy in in the Netherlands, and I don't think Theo was sent to England, as far as I know. So that may have been the difference between the two brothers. I mean, it could well have been that Vincent stayed in the Netherlands and went on as an art dealer, and then you never actually heard from him again. You would never have heard of a Vincent van Gogh. Okay, so let's go through this letter. Hopefully, my voice can get through it. By the way, speaking of voice, um, I'm about to finish narrating the very last chapter of Treachery, the 5-month search for Kaylee Anthony. I'm on the last chapter, and so that full audiobook will be available on Patreon um, probably later today. So look out for that. I must say the last couple of chapters I think are really intelligent, well written, insightful. And if you watch the CrimeCon thing with Stephanie and Lisa and me, a lot of what we address there is fully realized and taken a bit further in the last, especially 4 or 5 chapters. It's really, really interesting. I'm glad to see some people are happy about that. Okay, so let's go back to the letter. Okay, dear Theo, I sometimes think if my life was somewhat easier, how much more and how much better I should then be able to work. But I do work, and as you must have noticed from my last drawings, I begin to see a light that will conquer the difficulties. But you know that in addition to the exertion of drawing, scarcely a day passes without bringing some difficulty or other, which in itself would be hard enough to bear. And you see, there is a sorrow which I think I don't really deserve. At least I don't know in what way I deserve it, and which I should like to get rid of. Yvonne Phillips says, thanks to everyone. Nick, thanks for bringing Vincent to life for us. Thanks very much, Yvonne. Thanks a lot for that. And it's sent at 4:44 a.m. my time. Um, there's something to me incredibly sort of meaningful and deep in these words because of the way that they echo through time, right? So I want to really highlight this paragraph where he says, he's talking about life being difficult, which he doesn't often do. He says, and you see, there is a sorrow which I think I don't really deserve. At least I don't know in what way I deserve it, and which I should like to get rid of. So what he's trying to say here is that he wants to be happy. He doesn't want to be a struggling artist. He doesn't want to have a tragic life. He doesn't want to be mad or miserable. He wants to be happy, like all of us. He wants to have a good life. But he's saying, for whatever reason, he just can't get rid of difficulties. He can't get rid of sadness. He can't get rid of sorrow. He's sort of somehow attached to it, right? The part that I think is sort of missing is, and I remember having this conversation with my father when I was a lot younger. It was something like, I would say something, my father would respond, money can't make you happier, but it helps, right? In my father's typical way of being somewhat ironic or whatever. So my father would say, I would make this particular case, this particular statement, something to the effect of money isn't everything or whatever. And then he'd say, yeah, money isn't everything, and money can't make you happy, but it helps. And that is, I think, great advice for Vincent, which is, Vincent, you've got this sorrow that is following you, and your life is difficult, and the sorrow follows you wherever you're going. Or maybe if you sorted out your financial problems, maybe if you didn't get money from your brother all the time, Maybe if you weren't so insulted by someone saying you must make your own bread, maybe if you saw that as a challenge and as a problem to be solved, to to find a way, have art as a sideline and get a real job and look after yourself and make something of your life and make something of yourself in that sense, you'll be less sorrowful and less struggling and all those things, right? But the way in which this is so poignant and meaningful and sort of echoes through time is that around about 8 years later, regardless of what you think happened to Vincent, whether he was shot, whether he shot himself, one of his last words to his brother was, the sadness is going to last forever. You do get a real sense that his whole life he was trying to be happy. He was trying to find a way to happiness. And although there were glimpses and there were moments, overall, he couldn't solve that problem. He couldn't find his way to happiness. And when he eventually found himself with a bullet in his body, bleeding and dying, he was like, the sadness is going to last forever. I wasn't able to escape the tragic circumstances of my life. I was consumed by them, right? And I don't think that means he committed suicide. I don't think it means I couldn't stop being sad, so I killed myself. I think it means something happened to him, and that was the end of his journey, and so he never really succeeded. And that once again is what makes the incredible triumph of this artist, where he ends up becoming world famous. His art becomes worth millions. I think you could now even say tens of millions, even over $100 million. Just absolutely priceless art, but it came at the cost of someone who went through such a difficult time, who couldn't escape the misery. And the amazing thing is that in a way he did escape his misery by drawing these electrified scenes of the vitality of life, of the beauty of life, of the bristling electricity of life in the landscape, where a wheat field that sort of waving in the wind was coming alive with this sort of electric buzzing, right? And even the sky, even a normal blue sky would sort of be bristling with power lines, right? That's the extent to which the life that he so desperately sought, he was seeing in the throbbing sun and the sort of enervated landscape. Susan Smith, thanks so much for that. Susan writes, the irony is that his struggle is what makes him intriguing to the world. Absolutely. Part of what we get out of Van Gogh's story is a tragic story that is nevertheless an incredible adventure. Somebody did a documentary that's only on the letters, and I think the person who sort of narrates the letters is Benedict Cumberbatch. I don't know if you guys have seen that, but it's really incredible how, I mean, the guy who introduces the thing says it's an incredible story, and it actually is. To me, what is so amazing and important, and why I've continued doing these Van Gogh letters, even though it's been damaging to my channel, it's been damaging to the growth of my channel to some extent, even though it takes so much time, is because of the importance in getting to know one person. So through Van Gogh, you can see just how much detail there is, just how many layers there is, just how much complexity there is to a person. And so if you think you know somebody, look how much you can get to know someone, and just how many facets there are to that person's life and to their journey. And it's way more than saying Van Gogh was a mad artist, Van Gogh was a narcissist, Van Gogh was bipolar. if you want to know who Van Gogh was, read his letters. That's who Van Gogh was, not some other label or some other word. All of these words, right? And one of those words is the word that he uses, sorrow. He says, there is a sorrow which I don't really deserve. And I think there's a sorrow in terms of his story. That's a big reason why I've taken it upon myself to write books like The Murder of Vincent van Gogh, um, to tell what I believe is Vincent's, the true story of Vincent, right? To tell his story and not for his story to be told and it's not true, right? To tell his story the way that I think he would have wanted it told. And I think the fact that I'm Dutch and I'm from an artistic family helps in seeing him for who he really was, and seeing his story for what it really was, not the projections of art so-called experts. So then he says, you must tell me frankly, if you will be so kind, whether you know the cause of the following and give me any information about it. Near the end of January, I think a fortnight after my arrival here, Move's attitude toward me changed suddenly. So here he is addressing this. He's saying, something is going on with Move. Do you know what's going on? He became as unfriendly as he had been friendly before. I ascribed it to his not being satisfied with my work, and I was so anxious and worried over it that it quite upset me and made me ill, as I wrote you at the time. Mauve then came to see me and again reassured me that everything would turn out all right and encouraged me. So possibly Mauve thought Vincent's just on the rebound. He's been unhappy in love with Key, and this is just a kind of a temporary glitch. He didn't think that Van Gogh was actually going to move this prostitute move this prostitute in with him. And then when he did, Mauve was quite shocked and realized, wow, this is the real Vincent kind of thing. True Crime Rocket Science, Stephanie says, I like seeing the photos of people when you post their comments. Yeah. That's why it's nice if you can put a photo of yourself in your avatar, then we can get a look at you and not a bunch of flowers. But Gathering Place, I'm sure you may be not feeling that great now, but when you are, please do so that we can change, so that we can see you. Jean Karras, good to have you here. Go Batman says, I have a Casey Anthony case that will send. Okay. Ricardo says, I don't think he embodies sorrow, but others that surround him, and he ends up adopting it as his own. Ricardo, what is your avatar picture of? Looks a little bit like Cuba, but looks like quite an interesting, is it maybe San Francisco? Where is that? Paddy says, I learned a lot that in a YouTube documentary about Vincent van Gogh, but don't know which one. Wasn't it Loving Vincent? Stephanie's just put up a link to my book in case you haven't got it. Corporal Deb says, there's Corporal Deb, and we can see, are you a corporal? It looks like you've got quite a few medals going on there. Aren't you a lieutenant or a major? Would you like to be? Anyway, thanks, Corporal Deb, for that. That's from Australia. Okay, so let's continue. So he's really kind of, the penny has dropped that Mauve is not impressed with him, and he wants his brother to help him figure this out. It's like he can't figure out what the problem is. Then he says, but then on a certain evening shortly thereafter, he again began to speak to me in such a different way that it seemed as if quite a different man was before me. And I think that is pretty ironic for Van Gogh to be saying, because I think that is exactly what um, Mauve thought. It was like, Jeepers, who are you? You know, there's a scene in Oblivion where Tom Cruise says this to a beautiful woman. He's like, who are you? Right? And so the same thing from Van Gogh is like, Van Gogh has undergone this sort of transformation, and now Mauve is like, Jeepers, what is going on with you? And Van Gogh is like, I don't know why he's treating me differently. Like, what's the issue? Someone asked if I'm well or sick or something. I think I've got a bit of a post-nasal thing going on. Not a cold, but a little bit of phlegm. So sorry about that. So when I talk, it dries out my throat, and that's why I cough. Anyway, he says, I thought, my dear friend, it seems as if they had poisoned your ear with slander, but I was in the dark as to the side from which the poisonous wind had blown. Among other things, Mo began to imitate my speech and my manners, saying, your face looks like this, you speak like this, all in a spiteful way. But he is very clever at those things, and I must say it was like a good caricature of me, but drawn with hatred. So he's feeling at the same time that he's getting a little bit of love from one quarter, he's getting a lot of disparagement and opprobrium and criticism from another. And it does bother him, he's aware of it. On that occasion, he said a few things that only Tierstig used to say, and I asked him, Mo, have you seen Tierstig lately? No, said Mo, and we talked on. About 10 minutes later, he remarked that Tierstig had been to see him that same day. So now he's kind of complaining that Mauve and Tierstig, or certainly Mauve, is not being honest with him. And of course, Van Gogh isn't being honest with his own brother, is not being completely transparent with his own brother, is not being authentic, right? Then he says, then involuntarily the thought of Tierstig stayed with me, and I thought, is it possible, my dear Tierstig, that you are behind all this? And I wrote him a note, not impolite, deliberately not impolite. I only said to him, sir, I'm so sorry when such things such as you do not earn your living or you do not work are said about me. You must understand such things are too unreasonable for me to let them pass, and they do dishearten me. During recent years, I have had too many such things to grieve me, and I think there must come an end to it now. So, in terms of this part where he says, you do not work, I think there's a possibly a perception. There was possibly a perception from the other artists that Van Gogh has got a prostitute in his house constantly, day after day after day after day. And so they must have been thinking, think about how other people would have thought about this. They kind of would have been like, so, so, so that's what you're doing all day. You're getting money from your brother, and you've had a prostitute move in with you, and so that's what you're doing all day. You are just with the prostitute, and so in their minds they probably thought Van Gogh's priority is probably sleeping with this prostitute. That's kind of what he's doing all the time, whereas the reality was probably something more like she is a priority, but his art has remained a priority anyway. And so, but you can't really blame these people for thinking the way they were thinking, kind of thing. Corporal Deb says, I served 20 years As for rank, I got seriously injured. Sorry to hear that. To remain serving, I became a professional corporal. Okay, that's interesting. Is that like an army corporal? Go Batman says, much respect, Corporal Deb. Corporal Deb says, I enjoyed being a soldier discharged in 2001. So Corporal Deb, I think, likes quite a regimented life, an ordered life, where there's a strong hierarchy. I'm not sure if I do. I think maybe I did, but I don't think I do anymore. Especially if you're trying to escape the hierarchy, how do you? Then he says, this was the note which Tierstick spoke to you about on his first visit to Paris. When he came back from Paris, I went to see him and told him that if I had charged him with things for which he was not responsible, charged is a sort of oldish way of saying accused. I hoped he would excuse me because I was quite in the dark as to the cause of my difficulty. Well, then he was very kind to me again, but though I still visited Mauve once in a while, Mauve was moody and rather unkind. And I was told he was not at home a few times. In short, there were all the signs of a decided estrangement. So, in a weird sort of way, Vincent is kind of doing an investigation into the people around him and like why is their opinion of me changed? He sort of realized that something's going on, and he's starting to he wants to know what they're thinking, what they're saying, what does Theo know, and it's kind of becoming to some extent an investigation. To us, I think the answer is quite obvious, but to him, who's to some extent in the thick, who's stuck in his circumstances and wants the situation that he's in, and he knows how much he's drawing, it's quite a mystery. Okay, so now we go on to the next paragraph. Mauve's talk also became narrow-minded, if I may say so, as it used to be broad-minded. So you can imagine what that's in reference to. I had to draw from casts. That was the principal thing. So it seems like he is saying, what does Mauve expect? Does he expect me to draw from statues? I want to draw from a living figure. Well, of course, Vincent's got ulterior motives. He's actually in love with this figure that he's drawing, even though she's not that in love with him. Then he says, I hate drawing from casts. So a lot of this is rationalizing, but I had a few plaster hands and feet hanging in my studio, though not for drawing purposes. Once he spoke to me about drawing from casts in such a way as the worst teacher at the academy would not have spoken. I kept quiet, but when I got home, I was so angry that I threw those poor plaster casts into the coal bin, and they were smashed to pieces. So there you get a sense of the angry artist, right? So basically, what's happening now is Vincent is starting to reap the whirlwind of his behavior. So he's made a decision, is living with this woman, and what is now happening is society is responding to that. He's now no longer living with his parents, and he's now doing what he wants to do, and society is kind of disapproving. And he's like, I don't understand that. And in a way, that's quite hard to understand, that he can't see the woods for the trees. Then he goes on to say, then I said to Mauve, man, don't mention plaster to me again because I can't stand it. That was followed by a note from Mauve telling me that he would not have anything to do with me for 2 months. And you remember Vincent saying something similar about Tierstick, that I'm not going to see Tierstick or talk to him for 6 months or whatever it was. Not there yet says, I frequently feel that Vincent van Gogh is playing his family to meet his own need or desire. Not there yet. We want to see what you look like. Anyway, he goes on to say, indeed, we did not see each other during those 2 months, but meanwhile, I've not been idle, though I've not drawn from cast, I can tell you. And I must say, I worked with more animation and earnestness once I was free. So all of this is really just Van Gogh convincing his brother that he really has been working hard. Then he says, when the 2 months were almost up, I just wrote to congratulate him on having finished his large picture. And once I spoke to him, and once I spoke to him on the street for a moment. Now the 2 months have long since passed, and he has not come to see me. And since then, things have happened with Tierstig, which made me write to Mauve. Oh, sorry. So what's quite ironic here is that you almost get the idea that Mauve is trying to send a message to Van Gogh, which is you've got 2 months to get rid of this woman. You've got 2 months to sort your life out. You've got 2 months to kind of, just deal with your SHIT. And then I'll talk to you again. And then, of course, Vincent's like, I don't know what I'm doing wrong. I will just continue doing what I'm doing, right? And so it prompts Vincent to write to Mo the following. Let us shake hands and not feel animosity or bitterness towards each other, but it is too difficult for you to guide me, and it is too difficult for me to be guided by you if you require strict obedience to all you say. I cannot give that. So that's the end of the guiding and being guided, but it does not alter my feeling of gratefulness and obligation to you. So this is kind of a break between the protege and the what's the opposite of the protege? The the master and the apprentice. It's sort of a break where they are no longer going to work together. What is the opposite of a protege? Well, they say leader, a leader. It could also be a benefactor, a mentor. That's a good one. A mentor, a master, a rule maker, a guardian. But a mentor, I think, is probably the best word. Okay, so he's saying that's the end of the guiding and being guided. Now, if you think about it, how long has this relationship actually even been in place? If you take away the 2 months, so it's now April. If you go back 2 months, it's February, March. So it feels like Van Gogh was only really being taught by Mo for 2 months, basically December and January, right? You could even argue even less, maybe just January. So that's a very short time before Mo had enough of Van Gogh. And so it kind of gives you a bit of perspective into his friendship with Gauguin in the Yellow House, where that doesn't last very long either. It just gives you a sense that Van Gogh's quite a difficult guy to get along with, right? Corporal Deb says his brother had enough, but I don't think Vincent can fathom why his family are bitter. Yeah, Batman, unfortunately, you did flunk that one, but I'm sure you'll get one right sooner or later. Stephanie says you should share one of your paintings in a photo next to your name. Good idea. So Vincent then goes on to say, Mauve has not answered this. So he wrote him a letter, and Vincent Mauve didn't answer it. And he says, I've not seen him since. What urged me to say to Mauve, we must each go our own way, was the evidence that Tierstig really influenced Mauve. I learned it from Tierstig himself when he told me he would see to it that you stopped sending me money. So that's literally what. Bear in mind, Tierstig used to be Vincent's boss. So is a guy who works at Goupil who's saying, I'm going to tell your brother to stop sending you money. And you can kind of understand it when Tierstig probably knows where that money is going, right? Terry, if you change your avatar, that changes that's how you can put a photo there, right? If you change your avatar. So Mauve and I will see to it that there is an end to this. So a lot of this letter is in a way to make reparations, or to make sure that him and his benefactor, him and Theo, are good, and that Theo's going to keep sending him money in a way. I then wrote H.R. Tierstig a less amiable note than the first, and I particularly thanked him for his kind endeavors to guide me. You can see there's some sarcasm here. This time I thought fit to speak my mind, Theo, for you see, I remember that on the first evening I recognized one of Tierstig's expressions. Mauve did not want to confess he had seen him. And then I thought, well, Tierstig, are these your distinguished manners? That first you go and poison Mauve's mind, and later try to take from me the only assistance I receive. I didn't know such things were called distinguished manners. I thought they were called, look at that, treachery. So now he's getting quite upset, isn't he? Treachery. And if you think about it, there's also some treachery coming about from Vincent himself, right? Vincent isn't telling his brother what he's really doing, and shouldn't he? Well, if he did, would his brother send him money? Then he says, Theo, I am a man with faults and errors and passions, definitely. But I don't think I ever tried to deprive anyone of his bread or his friends. So it's kind of a good point, in a way. He's saying, I never interfered with somebody else to say, don't give that person money, kind of thing. But he's not been completely forthright about why someone is doing this. They're kind of thinking about how would Theo feel if he knew what is really going on. Then he says, I've sometimes fought people with words, but attempting a man's life because of a difference of opinion is not the work of an honest man. At least these are not honest weapons. So he's making a point, but I don't know if I agree with it. This isn't just a difference of opinion. It's not the work of an honest man. That's exactly the point. It's not the work of an honest man. Vincent van Gogh himself's not being honest here. Then he says, can you understand now that I'm sometimes grieved over many things, grieved to the heart, and that I'm grieved about Mauve? For though I shouldn't want to have the same guidance from him again, I should like to shake hands with him once more, and I wish he would do the same with me. He sees no link between his questionable behavior with a certain person and the strange responses he's getting. He thinks it doesn't make sense, but he's also not holding himself accountable in a real way. And in this sense, I think he's quite delusional and quite unrealistic and quite stubborn. Then he says, do you perhaps know something that I do not, or can you give me some information about this matter? So this is quite a different letter. It definitely takes on a different tone, where Van Gogh is really worried about what is being said about him. Some of his relationships are clearly falling apart, aren't they? Then he goes on to say, forgive me if I trouble you about it, but you see, I'm so in the dark. I finished another drawing of a woman's figure, such as sorrow, but larger, and I think better than the first. And I'm doing a drawing of a street where they are digging to lay sewer or pipes, diggers in a trench. So this is the painting that he was doing at the time. Where is it? Oh, it's at the top here. Diggers in a trench. So I don't know if you notice it's quite a white and black image. You know, it's got a lot of dark figures, and then it's juxtaposing certain light aspects to it, light white sleeves and things like that. I guess I don't know whether he's drawn snow here, probably not, but that is what he's sort of seeing around him. And if you try and imagine in your mind the scene coming to life, it would be quite interesting indeed to go back in time to that moment, 1882 April, and imagine if you could actually see him. Was he actually sitting there drawing them while they were working, and did they laugh at him? Did they refer to him? Did they ignore him? Corporal Deb said maybe he wanted to express the gloom of the work. Kathy says his art is so different now. Yeah, and so that is the end of that letter. And he goes on to say, Brighton is still in hospital. One wonders what that was all about. Then he says, I am making the drawings for Sien, that's his Uncle Cord, but I've been so depressed about what I've written you that it hindered my work. So I think that is quite a rare reference to Van Gogh being depressed. And I think, Kathy, you're right about his art being different. That is quite a depressing scene, people digging a hole, right? And so what you've got to look at here is what does make Vincent van Gogh depressed? And the answer is when he's being criticized, when his lifestyle is being criticized, when he's being kept in the dark, when people are holding grudges. I think anyone is depressed by that. In my personal life, in the last 2 months or so, I've had to deal with some similar issues with people that are quite close to me that are where you also feel to some extent in the dark, and you also feel things are going on that don't really make a lot of sense. But I think the difference is Van Gogh couldn't see a connection between things, whereas I think I do. But it nevertheless is depressing. In fact, it's more depressing when you realize what's really going on than when you don't, right? But I think this is a rare reference to him being depressed, and you've got to ask again, what are the ingredients that make him so unhappy, and then ask, are those ingredients present in July 1890 when he is supposedly, suicidal? Are those ingredients present? The other thing is, here he talks about being depressed, Yeah, he writes about being depressed in a letter. Does he say he's depressed in May, June, July of 1890, right? Specifically in July. Does he say, I'm depressed, I'm unhappy, I'm miserable, I'm anxious? So it's not that he can't say it. He can. He does. Here he does. Does he in July? Well, if he doesn't, then was he depressed or suicidal? Does that make sense? Okay, so, well, I actually thought we were going to stop at 2 hours. We've gone on just dealing really with one letter for basically another hour. I hope, Terry, you've enjoyed this. A lot of this is for your benefit. I just want to see how many letters we've got. I would love to get out of April. So it looks like he wrote a second letter immediately after this letter, still dealing with mauve. And then is there another letter? Another letter in late April. And then we get to May. Let's just have a look at how long this second letter is. And that's too long to deal with, I'm afraid. Too long to deal with. But these are some of the sketches that he does. They don't look terribly good there. Maybe when he was with those workers, he did a quick sketch and then went home. I don't think this is particularly, this guy from behind. I don't know if that's a terribly great perspective. So we'll continue with this whole thing on Sunday in Van Gogh Letters number 21. You can see how it's stuck in a sort of an emotional bog in a way, or not much is really happening. He's doing a few sketches, but there's really very little going on in his letters beyond asking Theo for money, and there's not really the kind of progress that we want to see. But like I say, we do want to get to June when he ends up in hospital. Hey, Tammy, we want to get to June, right? Do you want to get to June? Or do you want to keep going? What do you want to do? Tammy's not sure. Okay, just so remember the question I asked at the beginning. It was, is Van Gogh a landscape artist or a portrait painter, right? And I think it's an interesting question. I think, this is my personal opinion, I think he ends up being a landscape artist. If you think about the 70 paintings he painted in the last 70 days of his life, they were like 90%, if not more, landscapes, right? So I think the answer to the question is he ends up becoming a landscape artist, but that's not really what he wanted to do. I think he wanted his whole life to be a portrait painter, but he could never get people to sit for his portraits, which is why he's one of the artists with the most self-portraits of any of the famous artists. He really did do a lot of self-portraits. I don't know what the number is. I think it's something like 23. Let me see if I can bring it up. Van Gogh self-portraits. There are 35 self-portraits of Van Gogh, but just one portrait photo of him, right? Let me bring this up. This is from the Van Gogh Museum website. And yeah, he didn't paint self-portraits because he was vain. He couldn't really find other models, really. He was short of money in that period and struggled to find models. And so he ended up painting himself. And these are just some of them. These are just some of the self-portraits that he painted. Well, I thought they were going to show a lot more. Yeah, so I'll put a link to this. I thought they were going to show a lot more of these portraits, but anyway, here's a link to that if you want to read about it from the Van Gogh Museum. I think there's a better thing from Wikipedia where it literally shows all of them. Yeah, so this is definitely quite interesting. So this is a link from Wikipedia. Let me bring that on. So these are from Paris. You can see all in a similar vein, quite dark. That one's almost invisible, it's so dark. And then they get lighter and brighter and brighter. And there it's going back to kind of a darker one. And look how they get lighter and lighter. And then we go to, so a heck of a lot of self-portraits, isn't it? And then we go to Al. And then Saint-Remy. These are really well-known ones in Saint-Remy. And then none in Orvez, quite interesting. No self-portraits were executed in Orvez during his final weeks. That's quite interesting. And of course, he does do portraits of other people in Orvez, including the portrait that would really make him world famous, which is the portrait of Dr. Gachet. You might say that is quite a big statement, that his portrait of Dr. Gachet made him world famous, but I think there's a legitimate argument to say that if he'd never met Dr. Gachet, who was this doyen of the art world, who was this influential figure, the question sort of arises: would he have become as famous as he became? I don't know if there's that much doubt that he would have become a famous artist. I think the question is, how valuable would his art have become? Also, if Dr. Gachet didn't appropriate as many artworks, and the fact that Dr. Gachet himself was the subject of some of his art. And I mean, there's two paintings of Dr. Gachet, supposedly, allegedly. If that wasn't the case, would Dr. Gachet have gotten so involved? But the point being, Vincent van Gogh's most valuable artwork is a portrait, not a landscape, which is quite interesting. That's really the point I'm trying to make. I think the answer is Vincent van Gogh wanted to become a portrait painter, but because of his appearance, because of his lack of money, because of other things, he wasn't able to paint portraits. As a result, he painted landscapes, but in the fullness of time, a portrait of his became world famous. And so in a certain way, he got his wish, I suppose one could say. Stephanie says, yes, he took enough of Vincent's paintings for a collection, absolutely. Yvonne Phillips says, it's not easy to paint a self-portrait. He did well, though. He certainly did get better at it, didn't he? Okay, guys, so I'm going to put Timmy down. Timmy? Yeah. I'm going to put Timmy down. I must say, although I broke my rib months ago, I feel quite a lot of discomfort, and yeah, discomfort's probably the word, in my opposing shoulder. It's quite weird. stiffness, and feels like my internal bone mechanism and structure is not quite what it should be, which is a little bit worrying. Corporal Deb says, how much is Starry Night worth? I don't actually know. I'm not really sure. It's a good question. I don't know the answer to that. So I want to thank you guys for being here for 3 hours. I want to thank my voice for somehow getting through the last letter on that much water. I'm going to be narrating the last chapter of Treachery after a little bit of a break. But I want to thank you guys for being here. I want to thank the mods that were here, and then also everyone who contributed super chats. I appreciate that. And then also just for your comments, your interest, your observations and your thoughts. Thanks for sharing in that as well. So just to make one last visit to the poll, where does the title for this episode come from? Well, from Sien. It was the title that he gave the portrait that he did of her. I suppose you could say he got that also from a poem that also came up as well. Okay, so we will continue with Van Gogh letters. I think this is quite an interesting period where he's arguing with Mauve and is a little bit worried his brother's going to all of this poison, as he refers to, is going to reach his brother, and then his brothers may not pay for him. So we need to carry on with this a little bit further. And then we're going to get as far as June, and then from there we will skip a bit further. Terry Dean says, thank you all for carrying on for me. Okay, well, I'm sure a lot of people wanted me to carry on. So anyway, thanks everyone for making it. Take care. Look after yourselves. Those of you who are not well, I hope you found this episode soothing and a comfort of some kind. Bear in mind, Vincent had difficult times too. He got through them. So I hope you guys will too. Thank you for the votes. I'll see you guys again on Sunday, probably around about this time, maybe even a little bit earlier on Sunday. So until then, all the best, take care, and see you guys next time.